Nothing will crush a real estate investor's spirit like landlord stress. The difference between being successful and miserable in managing properties is education. Welcome to Landlord University, where landlords learn. Landlord University is recorded from inside the RentPrep office, where Stephen White and Jeff Pearson share the lessons learned from working with some of the most successful landlords.
Welcome to Landlord University in the News. I'm Jeff Pearson. I'm here with my co-host, Stephen White. How are you doing today, Stephen?
Pretty good, Jeff. Always exciting to have Jennifer on and talk about some stories that she runs across in her efforts to find great content for RentPrep. So she brought us a couple of good ones here today. Jennifer, how's it going?
Great. How are you guys?
Pretty good.
Doing well.
Good.
So we've got one here about a landlord in South Florida, and what's interesting about this article is it talks about landlords that are renting to sex offenders. And Jeff and I just did an episode a couple of days ago on renting to sex offenders and how some landlords have found ways to make it work for them. So this is a perfectly timed article here to go over.
Yes, it's a really interesting one. This news story comes out of Florida. And of course, Florida, just as in all states, there are laws that exist that limit where sex offenders can live. They can't be too close to elementary schools. They can't be too close to daycares, things like that. But this landlord in Florida, she actually has some properties that fall within the allowed parameters for sex offenders to live. And she actually specifically recruits sex offenders and provides housing opportunities for them. It's a post-release housing program for those who are being released from jail or released from prison. She's found it extremely successful so far. And this news article basically takes us through the process that she goes through to help those recently released nonviolent sex offenders, gives them an alternative from homelessness, helps them get jobs because they have a permanent address. She does say in the article that she screens very carefully and she's very specific to work with nonviolent sex offenders and works closely with their support system to make sure that they are, interested in change and really trying to rehab. She says in the article that these tenants are definitely some of her best renters. They are eager for the second chance. They're taking advantage of it. And she says that she's having so much success that she's actually turning away about 10 hopeful applicants every week. So she's doing a great thing providing these people with a second chance. But as you can imagine, her arrangement is not without some controversy from neighbors and other people in the area, however. So it's kind of one of those stories where you think, that's amazing, that's great. Somebody somewhere needs to be doing this. But again, how would you feel if that was in your neighborhood? So what do you guys think?
It's a real double-edged sword. I mean, I agree, she's trying to do something good for the community, and clearly there's a huge need. So she's filling, definitely a need in the area. If she's getting 10 applicants a week and
she's turning away 10 applicants a week. She's getting more than that.
Right. Yeah, that's, some landlords would kill for that. So, there's definitely, it's in high demand, but I can see, having some unease or unrest in the apartment community. So yeah, I can understand it's going to come with some problems, and, I'd be interested to hear from the people in the community and what type of place it creates. Do they feel safe there? Do they all know that? Well, obviously they all know that there's 18 apparently in this one apartment community living in there, 18 sex offenders. So yeah, definitely interesting. Does that drive the rental rate down? Is it going to be harder to fill that place with tenants who are not registered sex offenders? So definitely interesting. What do you think, Jeff?
Well, I think you've got a couple of things there, like you said, driving the rental rate down, but the property values in the neighborhood, because they said that a sex offender registry listed 18 sex offenders living in that apartment complex. Mm-hmm. And for the people who live around there, I can understand that feeling of, what have we got going on here? This is like the halfway houses. People, they want people to have the opportunity to get out of jail and re-enter society, but not in my backyard.
Right.
And so it makes it a pretty tough thing. But obviously she's found a way that works for her.
Right.
And hopefully it's working well for these people, because if we let them out of prison, then we need to bring them into society. But how do you do that? How do you make it work? Does it make sense to bring them together as a group
Yeah.
into this one big complex? She said, or the article said, that they had recently sold one of the buildings. I think there were 5 buildings. So it's a pretty good sized complex, which means that you're creating this collection of sex offenders, and maybe over time other types of felons who have recently come out of prison. And like you said before, it's a double-edged sword, because I agree with the fact that uh, somebody has to help these people get back into society, because otherwise we're going to end up with them on the streets and committing more crimes. Will they commit fewer crimes and have a lower recidivism rate if they're given decent housing and hopefully eventually jobs? It's a tough call.
Yeah, and we all have kids. I know Jeff, you do, Jennifer, you do.
Yes.
If you guys were living there, you have your kids living there. That's a tough thing. I mean, if my
It
kid tells
is.
me he wants to go out and play, I don't know if I feel super comfortable with that. I mean, I would think it's bad enough having one in a neighborhood, but that's a hotbed there. You've got 18, and so it almost feels like you're asking for trouble if you are living there with a kid. So I could see from the other tenant's perspective. I don't know if I'd feel comfortable with it necessarily. So I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to just she if she eventually had it where it was just all sex offenders living there. I could see that maybe being something that works out, where just kind of a safe haven for them, as long as it's working out and going well. And it seems, according to her, that they're good renters. So she's doing a good job screening them. So, you know, maybe that would work better.
Yeah, it really is a tough one,
Yeah.
because there's no simple solution, without question.
Right.
And power to her to find a way to rent out the units in her complex, and hopefully it goes well for her and for her tenants, as well as for the neighbors. But I know it's not a comfortable situation for the neighbors. But again, you can't just say sorry.
Right.
These people have to be homeless. But
Right.
who steps up and takes care of it? And obviously this landlord has done that.
Yeah, I definitely give her some credit there for that, and trying to do something for the community. Anytime we see landlords, trying to make the place, make their communities a better place. It sounds weird to say that somebody who's working with sex offenders is doing that, but like it says, it's better than having them homeless or ending up on the street, and trying to help them back into creating a better life. So yeah, definitely interesting.
Yes, it is. So Jennifer, tell us about your next story.
Well, this story is from Oklahoma City, and this is about a landlord that feels like she is stuck in the middle. Her tenant and her rental property was the subject of a police raid. They were looking for some drugs. During the raid, they busted open the toilet, busted open the sewer line. They thought maybe that the tenant had flushed the drugs. They did find some drugs. They made the arrests, and the dust is settled. But now the tenant is looking for some help with paying the thousands of dollars that to fix the damage. The city basically said, "Hey, that's us doing our job. Sorry, why should we be responsible?" The landlord says, "Well, somebody needs to help me out." So she's actually filed a tort claim with the city, and it's sort of one of those situations where obviously the person who's really to blame can't pay for the damages. So what happens at that point?
Right.
So what point can a landlord recover damages from the city or a police department or something like that for their actions of doing their job?
Right. I gotta say, this is not as uncommon as you would think. I've heard stories of this before. I've definitely talked to landlords personally that have expressed to me the importance of screening because of a situation they had. And I've heard several of them say, we had a police raid. They were selling drugs out of her house. The police came in and just destroyed the place. I've heard of police ripping walls out because they found something behind a wall or behind the drywall. So they were they had an axe and they were literally just cutting holes in the wall and ripping the walls down. In this case, they were, tearing through the plumbing. Um, I've never heard of this city compensating anybody. And it was interesting in the article here, there was an attorney who had worked on a handful of these cases, and he said he can only recall one instance where the police raided a wrong home, and the city did pay a small amount after the claim was filed. So I think, the city is not going to chip in and help out at all. Like their stance on it is they're doing their job. So I don't think they're going to get much help in this case either from the city. I don't think the city's going to do anything to help them with the damages.
I think one of the interesting things on this is that in the article, they do say that the city repaired other small scale damage that occurred during the raid, um, like damage to screen door, doorstop, and linen closet. And
Yeah, but not the big stuff.
yeah, exactly. When it comes to the big stuff, they went in and tore up the plumbing to
Right.
see if they had thrown something down the toilet. So obviously, it wasn't a simple job. So this goes back to one of those things of if you give them free reign to just tear up what they want and then not have to worry about paying for it, where's the control?
Right.
If the city had to be responsible for fixing all of the things that they damaged when they did these types of raids, they might be a little more hesitant to damage as much stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, as a landlord, you're definitely caught in the middle. I could see from this landlord's perspective, it's a bad place to be in. I mean, now you've got, the damage going on. You got to deal with a criminal in the place. They're going to be there most likely through the court process if they get out on bail or anything like that. So it's the whole thing. It's tough on a landlord to try and deal with the aftermath of something like that, and then also the stigma of having your rental property as a drug house.
Yeah.
So and again, we've always talked about this. The last thing you want is to have it show up in the news. So if it's a pretty major affair, then it is going to show up in the news or on the nightly news on TV or in the paper. And again, that's driving your rental rate down. I see as in the future you're going to deal with all kinds of issues.
Yeah, exactly. And this goes back to the whole thing of doing what you can to make sure you're aware of what's happening in your property, doing regular inspections, certainly an annual inspection, and there may be other, smaller inspections that you could or should do, at least driving by, to make sure that you're getting a sense of what the property looks like from the outside, but being in somewhat regular contact with your tenant, especially if you live in an area that you expect could be prone to this type of thing, with people selling drugs or committing other crimes out of your property. You probably need to be even more vigilant to be sure that stuff isn't happening. And if it is, start immediately to take the appropriate steps within the legal system to replace that tenant with a better one.
Yeah, and I wish I can have any landlord that's ever tried disputing why they would need criminal records, as part of their background check. We get it does happen every so often where a landlord will say, well, I really don't care about their criminal past. I just want to make sure that they're paying the rent. Well, that absolutely it can affect, their ability to pay the rent and you having to pay for damages and things like that. So criminal records are a huge part of it. And, just doing your diligence, making sure that you are checking to be sure that you're not renting to somebody with a known history of this and you're just asking for trouble.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Jennifer, what's your thought on this article?
Well, I can see both sides as well. I would be afraid that if cities were actually going to start having to be liable for these sorts of things, that it might put sort of a chill on law enforcement and criminal investigation issues. If the city is saying, if a police department or gang unit, drug unit, or whatever, saying, well, I'm not going to investigate to the full way that I know how to fight crime because I'm afraid of the big bill, or my department's going to get cut with funding or something. I would hate for that kind of cloud to hang over effective crime fighting too. I mean,
Right.
I just it's hard.
It really
it's a
is.
question with no answer.
Well, if you take this back to the previous article that we discussed, where you have a landlord who is renting to a number of convicted felons or former convicted felons, and if all of a sudden the police start raiding her units on a regular basis, she could rack up a lot in bills.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It makes you think twice, in that case also about, do you want to have a property with, that attachment to it and having to deal with that. So yeah, That's a tough call. I would say for most landlords, if you're doing your job and screening and making sure that they don't have a criminal past. Of course, you could be the unlucky landlord that these just happen to be the first time that they get caught or get,
Right.
arrested. But most of the time, I think, these type of people have a history, and so that's what I've seen for sure. So you gotta check, you gotta make sure, and yeah, I've had many conversations with landlords in this exact same position that they're stuck with the bill at the end of the day.
It's tough stuff. Well, great. Stephen and Jennifer, I think that wraps up another episode of In the News.
All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Landlord University, and remember to visit rentprep.com/landlordu to see show notes and access free resources like forms and guides. And be sure to check out Jeff Pearson hosting his own hit podcast at thementorimpact.com.